AITA for demanding that my friend pay for the car he damaged, or I'll take him to court. I've been friends with this guy, Ben, for about 10 years. We met in high school and hit it off almost instantly. We've always been close and have had a lot of good times together, but we've also had our share of disagreements, especially in the last few years. Ben has always been a bit reckless, and I've often found myself stepping in to help him out of messes he's gotten himself into. Over the years, it's just kind of been the dynamic of our friendship. Me being the responsible one, and him being the one who needs constant help or advice. For the most part, I didn't mind. I'm a good friend, and I thought that's just what you do for people you care about. However, things took a turn recently when Ben borrowed my car. Now, I'm not a millionaire, but I've worked hard to afford a decent car. It's a used vehicle, nothing fancy, but it's in great condition. I take good care of it because I rely on it for work, and I need it to be in good shape to get around. I don't lend it out to just anyone, but Ben's one of my oldest friends, and I trust him. Or at least I thought I did. One weekend, Ben called me and said his car was in the shop for repairs and that he needed a ride to visit his parents. His own car wasn't going to be ready for a few days, and he was feeling stuck. Normally, I would have just driven him, but he lives in another city, and it would have been a long drive for me to do solo. So, I offered to let him borrow my car for the trip. I made sure to tell him to be careful, not to drive recklessly, and to let me know if anything went wrong. He assured me he'd take good care of it and that nothing would happen. Fast forward to the end of the weekend, and Ben texts me saying he's on his way back to return the car. I'm glad he's done with the trip, but when he pulls up to my place, I immediately notice something's off. The car has scratches all over the side, the bumper is dented, and there's a sizable dent near the rear door. I'm speechless for a second because I can't believe it. I walk up to him, and my first words are, "What happened to my car?" Ben just shrugs and says, "Oh, there was this parking lot with some really tight spaces and I accidentally hit a pole. It's not that bad, right?" I'm trying to keep my cool because I'm genuinely furious, but I don't want to completely lose it. I ask him to explain what happened, and he says that while backing out a parking space, he didn't realize how close he was to the pole, and the car got scratched and dented. He also says that he didn't want to cause a scene by involving anyone, so he didn't report it to the lot owners or anyone else. At this point, I'm absolutely livid. He's damaged my car, and now he's acting like it's no big deal. I tell him that this is going to cost a lot to fix, and he just says, "Well, cars get damaged sometimes. It's just a little scratch, man. I don't think it's worth making a big deal out of." I tell him it's not just a little scratch, and I'm not going to let this slide. I've been more than understanding when it comes to Ben in the past, but this time he's gone too far. I tell him I'm going to need him to pay for the repairs, or I'm going to take legal action. Ben immediately starts freaking out. He says he doesn't have that kind of money, and it's not fair for me to ask him to pay that much. He says it's just a few scratches, and I shouldn't be overreacting. He even suggests I should just get it fixed and not worry about the money. But I've worked hard for what I have, and I'm not just going to let him destroy my property and walk away without consequences. We go back and forth for a while, and eventually I tell him that if he doesn't pay for the repairs, I will be taking him to court. I've never been in a situation like this before, and I didn't know what else to do. I'm not the type of person to escalate things like this, but I've reached a point where I feel like I have no choice. My car isn't some little beater. This is my livelihood, and I'm not going to let him ruin it and expect me to just forgive him. Ben's response was, "Come on, man. You can't be serious. I'm your friend. We've been through so much together. You really want to take me to court over a stupid dent?" He's basically guilt-tripping me at this point, saying I'm being unreasonable and that I should just let it go. I can understand why he feels that way. He's my friend, and he's trying to downplay what happened to make it seem like it's not a big deal. But it's a big deal. It's my property, and I can't just let someone walk all over me. Now, a few of my other friends have gotten involved, and they're all telling me I'm overreacting. They say I should just let Ben off the hook, that it's just a car, and that I'll be fine. Some of them are even saying that Ben is going through some personal stuff, and that I should cut him some slack. I'm not unsympathetic to what he's going through, but I can't just let him off the hook for something so serious. If the roles were reversed, I would have offered to pay for repairs without hesitation. So, here I am, stuck between my principle and my friendship. I'm really considering taking legal action at this point, because I don't know what else to do. I don't want to lose my friend, but I also don't want to let him off easy when he's clearly at fault. AITA for demanding Ben pay for the damage to my car, or should I just let it go for the sake of our friendship? If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more awesome videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. Thanks for your support. AITA for kicking my brother out of my house after he broke my trust. So, a bit of backstory. I, 28F, have an older brother, Ryan, 31M, who I've always been close with. We grew up in a pretty chaotic household where our parents were always fighting, so Ryan and I became each other's rock. We had a lot of late-night talks, supported each other through high school, and I was one of the few people who actually believed in him when he made some pretty dumb decisions in his 20s. I don't want to sound like a martyr, but I've always been the one to bail him out, financially or emotionally, when things went south. A few months ago, Ryan came to me in a panic. His long-term girlfriend, Emily, 30F, had broken up with him because of some trust issues they had. Now, I won't get into the specifics of what happened between them, but it was a messy breakup, and Ryan was devastated. They had been together for 5 years, and I know he thought she was the one. Emily was good to me, and I didn't want to see him hurt. At the time, he was struggling to keep his apartment because he wasn't sure how he was going to afford rent on his own after the breakup. He was talking about moving back in with our parents, but that was out of the question for him because, as he put it, they weren't any help, and he didn't want to be in that environment again. I understood his frustration, but I also knew that moving back home would be terrible for him, so I offered him a place to stay in my apartment. I live alone, and while my place is small, I figured it would be a temporary solution while he got back on his feet. I told him it would be for a couple of months, max, just until he found another job. He had been laid off recently and could find a more permanent living situation. Things went fine for the first couple of weeks. Ryan was respectful of my space. He pitched in around the apartment, and he made an effort to keep his things organized. But then, everything started to unravel. It started small. One day, I came home from work and noticed that a few of my things were out of place. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid. But over time, it became obvious that Ryan had been going through my things. I found some of my personal journals moved around in my bedroom, and once, I even found some of my private documents on my desk that I specifically never intended for anyone else to read. I confronted him about it, and he just brushed it off. He said he was curious, and that he didn't think it was a big deal. I tried to explain to him that my personal space, my belongings, and my privacy were important to me, but he didn't seem to take it seriously. Things continued to escalate, and I started feeling like I had no privacy left in my own home. Then came the breaking point. A few days ago, I found out that Ryan had gone through my phone while I was at work. I use a password to lock it, but I noticed a couple of messages had been opened. When I asked him about it, he admitted to it. I was livid. I asked him why he felt the need to invade my privacy like that. He tried to justify it by saying he was worried about me because he didn't want me to make the same mistakes that Emily did. Apparently, he had gone through my messages to see if I was talking to any men because he was worried I was dating the wrong people. Now, I get that he's protective and all, but I'm a grown woman who can make my own decisions. I was furious, and I told him that I'd had enough. I told him that he had crossed the line, and he needed to leave my apartment. I was done. Ryan was shocked. He begged me to reconsider, saying he didn't mean any harm and that he was just trying to help. But honestly, I was done at that point. I told him that I couldn't continue living with him under those circumstances, and I wasn't going to let him disrespect my privacy like that. I told him to start looking for somewhere else to stay, and if he didn't, I would have to make arrangements to kick him out. I felt terrible about it because he's my brother, but my boundaries were non-negotiable. He left the apartment that same night, and I haven't heard from him since. Here's where the situation gets tricky. Our parents are both mad at me for kicking him out. They think I should have been more patient, and that family comes first. They're telling me I should have tried to work things out with him. I get where they're coming from, but I feel like I've been more than patient with Ryan. I've been his safety net for years, bailing him out of bad situations, and I've always tried to be there for him. But this felt like a breach of trust that I couldn't ignore. My home is my sanctuary, and I don't think I should have to sacrifice my personal space and privacy just to accommodate his problems. Now, Ryan isn't speaking to me either. He's been posting passive-aggressive stuff on social media about how family isn't supposed to turn their back on you when you're down, and how he's been through enough already. He even made a post about how I wasn't there for him when he needed me most. I feel guilty because I love him, and I do want to support him, but I just don't know where to draw the line. Was I wrong for kicking him out? AITA? AITA for refusing to let my sister-in-law move in after she got divorced. So I, 30F, have a husband, Mark, 32M, and we've been married for 5 years. Mark's family is pretty close-knit, and we spend a lot of time together. I get along well with most of them, but there's one person who's always been a bit of a challenge. My sister-in-law, Sarah, 34F. To give you a little context, Sarah and I have always had a somewhat strained relationship. She's a bit of a perfectionist and can be controlling, and I'm more of the laid-back type. We've had our differences, but we've been able to keep things civil for the most part. Now, a few weeks ago, Sarah and her husband, Adam, 37M, announced they were getting a divorce. It wasn't a huge surprise. There had been tension between them for a while, and they had been fighting a lot. I think everyone kind of expected it to happen sooner or later. What had surprised me was when Sarah called me last week and asked if she could move in with me for a while. Apparently, after the divorce, Sarah found herself in a tough spot financially. Adam, who had been the primary breadwinner, wasn't offering much support, and Sarah's job didn't pay enough for her to afford rent on her own. She said she was too proud to move back in with her parents and didn't want to live with any of her other friends, so she was hoping I would let her stay with us. She assured me it would only be temporary, maybe for a couple of months while she got back on her feet. At first, I was taken aback. Mark and I have a pretty small apartment, and while we've got a guest room, it's not really big enough for long-term living. Plus, we already have a busy schedule, and I'm not sure I'm ready to invite someone into our personal space like that. I also wasn't sure how well it would go, considering Sarah and I had never been the closest. But I told her I'd think about it. I discussed it with Mark that night, and he was initially hesitant too. He said it might be difficult with Sarah in our space, especially with everything that's been going on between her and Adam. But Mark is also a really compassionate person, and he doesn't like seeing his family struggle, so he was torn. We went back and forth for a couple of days, and in the end, I said no. I explained to Sarah that while I sympathized with her situation, I didn't feel comfortable having her move in. I told her that our apartment wasn't really suited for another person long-term, and that it would put a strain on our relationship. I also told her that I didn't think it would be the healthiest situation for either of us, given our history of tension. I suggested she look into other options like finding a roommate or looking for short-term rentals nearby. Sarah didn't take the news well. She got really upset, telling me that I was being unsupportive and selfish. She said that as family, I should be there for her, especially now that she was going through such a difficult time. She also mentioned that our other relatives hadn't been as open with her, so she was counting on me. I tried to explain my reasons calmly, but she just kept insisting that I wasn't being there for her like I should be. The next day, I got a call from Mark's mom. She told me that Sarah had called her, and now she was upset with me too. Apparently, our mother-in-law was disappointed in me for not offering Sarah a place to stay and suggested that I was being too harsh. Mark's dad also called, but he was a bit more neutral, just saying that Sarah was having a tough time and that I should reconsider. I felt caught in the middle of all of this. On the one hand, I understand that Sarah is going through a rough time, but on the other hand, I didn't think it was fair to ask me to rearrange my entire living situation for her, especially after everything that had happened between us. I also feel like I've done my part as a family member by supporting her emotionally in the past, and this just felt like too much to ask. Now, the family is divided. Mark is stuck in the middle. He understands where I'm coming from, but he also feels guilty because he knows his sister is struggling. He said he didn't want to make me feel like I had to change my stance, but at the same time, he doesn't want to be the one to tell Sarah no. I've told him that it's ultimately my decision, but it's putting a strain on our relationship with his family, and that's making me uncomfortable. Sarah is still upset with me, and I'm starting to feel like the bad guy. I get that she's going through a tough time, but I feel like I shouldn't have to sacrifice my peace of mind and my personal space just to accommodate her. At the same time, I know it's hard to see family members struggle, and maybe I should have been more compassionate. I'm honestly feeling really guilty, but also firm in my decision. So, AITA for refusing to let my sister-in-law move in after her divorce. AITA for kicking my roommate out after she continuously ate my food without asking. I, 29F, have been living with my roommate, Claire, 26F, for about 2 years now. When we first moved in together, everything was great. We got along well, shared some common interests, and I genuinely thought we were on the same page about respect and boundaries in a shared living space. We set up a pretty basic set of house rules when we first moved in, including keeping personal food separate and being considerate of each other's space and belongings. I thought those were fair and reasonable, especially since we both work full-time jobs and aren't home all the time. At first, everything seemed fine. We both had our own designated areas in the kitchen for food storage, and we'd occasionally cook for each other or share things like snacks if one of us was low on something. It was a friendly, low-key arrangement. But over time, I started noticing that some of my food was missing. I thought maybe I was forgetting what I bought, or maybe I just hadn't kept track. It wasn't until a few weeks ago that I realized it was actually Claire eating my food without asking. The first time I confronted her about it, I found that my favorite granola bars had disappeared, and I had just bought a new box the day before. I mentioned it casually like, "Hey, I think I had some granola bars in here. Did you happen to eat them?" She immediately seemed defensive and said, "Oh, I thought they were ours. I didn't realize they were yours." I accepted her explanation, but I made sure to be clearer about labeling things after that. I put my name on all of my food items and started using tape to mark items that were specifically mine. Despite this, the problem kept happening. I came home from work one day to find that my pack of frozen meals, which I had specifically bought for busy work days, was half gone. I was livid. I confronted Claire again, and this time, she seemed less apologetic. She said something like, "I didn't realize you were so serious about your food. It's not a big deal, is it? It's just food." I tried to explain that it was a big deal to me, especially because I had budgeted for these meals, and I wasn't just buying things for the sake of buying them. She apologized, but still didn't seem to take it seriously. A few days later, I came home to find that not only had my leftover pizza disappeared again, but she had also eaten the snacks I'd brought back from a family gathering, which I had been really excited to enjoy. At that point, I snapped. I told Claire that this had gone on long enough, and I was really upset about her disrespecting my boundaries and eating my food without asking. She didn't take it well. Claire accused me of being overdramatic and said that I was acting like it was the end of the world over something so minor. She mentioned that we were both adults, and it wasn't like I had to have a private stash of food. She even said, "It's just food. It's not like I'm stealing anything valuable." I tried to stay calm, but it was hard for me not to get frustrated because, to me, it wasn't just about the food, it was about respect and boundaries. I told her that I needed her to stop eating my food without asking, and that if it happened again, there would be consequences. She promised it wouldn't happen again, but it didn't take long for me to realize that I couldn't trust her anymore. A few days later, my favorite yogurt, something I'd been looking forward to all week, was gone. I was done. I called Claire into the living room and told her that I could no longer live with her under these conditions. I told her she needed to find another place to stay. She was taken aback and tried to argue, saying that I was blowing things out of proportion, but I stuck to my decision. I told her that she could either pay me back for all the food she had taken, or she could leave. I wasn't going to continue living in a situation where I couldn't trust her to respect my belongings. Claire was angry and hurt, and she accused me of being petty and unfair. She said that we had been friends for a long time, and I was throwing that away over some food. I tried to explain that it wasn't just about the food, but she wasn't hearing me. She ended up moving out a few days later, but she was still upset, and we haven't really spoken since. Now, my other friends and a few mutual acquaintances are telling me that I overreacted. They say I should have just talked to her more about the issue and not made such a drastic decision over something that seems so small. Some even say that I should have let it go since it was just food and that I was being too strict. Others think I was in the right to enforce my boundaries, but the whole situation has left me feeling conflicted. I can understand that it might seem like a small issue in the grand scheme of things, but for me, it was about trust and respect. I feel like I had communicated my boundaries clearly and repeatedly, and at some point, I had to take a stand to protect myself. Still, I can't help but wonder if I was too harsh, or if I could have handled things differently. AITA for kicking Claire out over her eating my food without asking. AITA for refusing to let my friend's kids stay at my house after they damaged my belongings. So, this is a bit of a mess, and I'm really torn about whether I'm being unreasonable or not. I, 29F, have a very close friend, Claire, 30F, who I've known since college. We've been through a lot together, and I consider her to be one of my best friends. We don't get to see each other as often as we'd like because she lives about an hour away, and I'm pretty busy with work and personal life, but we still keep in touch regularly. Claire has 2 kids, Lily, 8F, and Max, 5M. They're adorable, but I've always had a hard time connecting with them. It's not that I don't like kids, but they're a bit chaotic. Lily is hyperactive, always running around, and Max is a little too curious for his own good. I've always tried to be patient when they visit, but they've definitely tested my limits a few times. So here's where the issue started. Claire reached out to me last week asking if her kids could stay at my house for the weekend. She and her husband, John, were planning a weekend getaway to celebrate their anniversary, and they didn't want to board the kids at a daycare or leave them with anyone else from their family because they had a lot of personal stuff going on. I was hesitant, but agreed because she's my friend, and I thought I could handle it for just a couple of days. I told her that I would need to clear it with my roommate, but since we have a decent amount of space, it seemed doable. I should have known something was off when Claire didn't provide any details about the kids' behavior or anything that would help me prepare for their stay. Normally, when kids come over to my place, it's just a couple of hours or an afternoon, and they're usually well-behaved or their parents are around to manage them. But I figured this time would be different, especially since it was going to be a whole weekend, and I wanted to be a good host. I wish I had gotten more specific about the kids' routines or needs before they arrived, because as soon as they walked through the door, things started going downhill. Lily was bouncing off the walls, running around the apartment, and Max was asking constant questions about everything, none of which were normal questions. He asked about my expensive headphones, why I had so many candles, and if he could touch everything in my kitchen, which I tried to explain was off limits. But as soon as I turned my back, Max was getting into things, and Lily was being a little whirlwind, opening all my cabinets and drawers. By the time Claire and John left, I was already starting to feel overwhelmed. I asked Claire if she had any routines or suggestions to make things easier, and she just said, "Oh, they're just kids. Let them be free and have fun." I smiled and agreed, but deep down, I had a bad feeling about what was coming. The first night, I tried to make it through with some patience, but it was exhausting. They wouldn't eat the dinner I made, complain about everything, and then wouldn't go to bed until after 10:30 p.m., even though I had asked them to be in bed by 9. I barely got any sleep, and the next morning, I was already feeling frazzled. Things only got worse the following day. Lily and Max had decided to use my couch cushions as a fort, but they were throwing them around, and one of them got damaged when it fell off the couch and hit the floor. I didn't want to say anything right away, thinking it was just a one-off thing, but then Max started spilling juice on the rug, and Lily knocked over a plant that I'd had for years. It wasn't a huge plant, but it was something that meant a lot to me, and it got completely destroyed when the pot broke. I was livid, but tried to keep it together. I told the kids that they needed to be more careful, and I asked them to help clean up the messes. Claire had told me that they were used to being hands-off with their discipline, and it was clear they didn't listen to me as an authority figure. At one point, Lily went into my room without permission and started playing with my makeup, which I had to clean up when she made a mess of my brushes and some products. It wasn't a huge deal, but after everything else, it just felt like I was at my limit. The final straw came when I walked into my living room to find both kids had drawn all over my wall with a permanent marker they had somehow found in my desk drawer. The marker had bled through the paint, and now I had a massive stain I wasn't sure I could fix. I had already been putting up with a lot, but this felt like a direct violation of my personal space. I tried calling Claire to let her know what had happened, but she didn't answer. She called back about an hour later and apologized, saying she would deal with it when they returned. But she also said, "Well, they're kids. What do you expect?" And that irritated me even more. I understand that kids can be messy and chaotic, but I felt like Claire wasn't taking responsibility for her children's actions or how they were damaging my property. When Claire and John finally came back to pick up the kids, I had to have a conversation with her about everything that had happened. I told her about the damage to the couch cushions, the plant, my makeup, and the wall. Claire apologized, but didn't seem all that concerned. She just said, "I'll make sure to replace anything they broke, and I'm sure you can clean it up." When I mentioned that I was upset about the lack of discipline and respect for my things, Claire brushed it off and said that kids don't really understand that kind of thing. I felt hurt and frustrated, and I told her I wasn't comfortable with the idea of having the kids stay at my place again. I explained that while I love her kids, I wasn't prepared to deal with that level of mess and chaos again, especially without any real consequences for their behavior. I said that if she wanted me to help with them in the future, it would have to be in a more structured way, like shorter visits with more supervision. She seemed a little offended, but didn't argue too much. Now, I'm feeling guilty because I know Claire is going through a lot right now, and I know she's probably already stressed out from her marriage and family life. But I also feel like my home is my sanctuary, and I shouldn't have to deal with the constant damage and disrespect just to help her out. So, AITA for refusing to let my friends' kids stay at my house again after they damage my things? AITA for telling my sister she can't bring her boyfriend to my house anymore after he made fun of my job? I, 30F, have always been close with my sister, Sarah, 28F. Growing up, we shared everything, clothes, secrets, and even a pretty similar sense of humor. We've always had each other's backs, and I've done a lot for her over the years. But recently, there's been a tension between us because of her boyfriend, Mark, 32M. I'm not one to judge people right away, but things started getting weird with him, and I'm now questioning if I've been too lenient with Sarah's relationship. I've been working in social services for the past 6 years. I work with at-risk youth, helping them navigate through tough situations like abuse, homelessness, and mental health struggles. It's not glamorous work, and it's not well paid, but I find it incredibly rewarding. My job can be emotionally exhausting, and I deal with some really heavy stuff on a daily basis. But it's also fulfilling because I know I'm making a real difference in people's lives. About a year ago, Sarah started dating Mark. At first, he seemed like a nice guy, fun, easygoing, and friendly enough. He was always respectful, but he never really got too close to me. I thought nothing of it. But as time went on, I started noticing some subtle, offhand comments he would make when we'd all hang out. For example, Sarah and I were having dinner one night at my place, and Mark was over too. We were talking about our jobs, and I mentioned how I had just finished a particularly difficult case involving a teen who had been struggling with PTSD. I was talking about how draining the process can be, but how rewarding it is to see a kid finally feel like they're getting control over their life. Mark immediately laughed and said, "Sounds like a real fun job. I don't know how you can deal with all that negativity all the time. I'd probably go crazy." I just laughed it off, thinking maybe he didn't understand what it was like to work in social services. It wasn't the first time he made comments about my job, but it was the first time I felt kind of uncomfortable with how dismissive he was. Later that night, Sarah and Mark were talking about their upcoming vacation, and somehow, my job came up again. Mark, without missing a beat, said, I guess it's cool that you're helping people, but don't you ever feel like you're just wasting your time? You can't save everyone, right? Sounds like a lot of emotional labor for not much payoff." At that moment, I felt like I'd been slapped. I know social services can be undervalued by some people, but hearing it from someone I barely knew and someone who didn't seem to have much empathy at all really hurt. I excused myself from the conversation and went to my room to cool off. I tried to explain to Sarah later that night why I was upset, but she brushed it off, saying Mark didn't mean anything by it and that he was just being honest. She told me not to take it personally. I tried to let it go, but over the next few months, Mark made more and more comments like this. He'd joke about how easy my job must be compared to his. He works in a sales job, and how he couldn't imagine dealing with the drama that comes with working with troubled teens. One time, he asked me if I ever thought about switching to a real job with better pay, because he thought my noble cause wasn't going to take me far financially. I didn't even know how to respond to that. Eventually, I started getting to the point where I didn't want to hang out with Sarah and Mark anymore. I try to avoid hanging out with them at my house, but Sarah would always push me to invite them over. She'd say things like, "Come on, you know Mark didn't mean it the way it came out. He just doesn't know how hard your job is." But I started feeling like I was being disrespected. I'd been through a lot in my job, and I didn't need someone who didn't understand or appreciate it making me feel small for it. The last straw came a couple of weeks ago. Sarah and Mark came over to my house for dinner, and we were having a casual conversation about how difficult it can be to maintain relationships when you're always working long hours. I was talking about how much it meant to me that my friends and family supported me, especially when I sometimes felt emotionally drained from my job. Mark, as usual, had to chime in. "Yeah, but I don't get how you can go home after dealing with all that sadness and not get depressed yourself," he said, almost like he was trying to be funny. "I'd be in a constant state of misery if I worked with people who were so messed up all the time." He went on to say, "No offense, but I think I need a real vacation after every week of that kind of emotional stuff." At this point, I'd had enough. I told Sarah that I couldn't keep doing this. Mark was crossing the line, and I wasn't going to keep inviting him to my house if he was going to keep making those kinds of comments. I explained that my job was important to me, and his constant dismissal of it was hurtful. Sarah seemed taken aback, but didn't say much. Mark, on the other hand, looked annoyed and said, "Wow, okay. Sorry for not worshiping your job, but you really need to lighten up." I told him that wasn't the issue. It wasn't about being offended, but about respect. I felt like he didn't respect me or the work I did, and I wasn't going to tolerate it anymore. I told Sarah that if she wanted to see me, she could come over without him, but I couldn't keep allowing Mark to be in my space if he kept belittling my work. Sarah was upset and said I was being too harsh. She said Mark didn't understand the gravity of my job, and I needed to be more patient with him. But I honestly felt like she was just making excuses for him. I told her I loved her, but I couldn't keep biting my tongue for the sake of a relationship. After all, I've supported her through every other tough time in her life, and I felt like she wasn't doing the same for me. She's been distant ever since, and now I'm questioning if I did the right thing. I understand that Mark might not get what it's like to work in social services, but I feel like he should at least respect that I love my job and that it means something to me. My friends think I did the right thing, but I'm still not sure. AITA for telling my sister she can't bring her boyfriend to my house anymore after he made fun of my job. AITA for not wanting to let my brother live with me after he got kicked out. So I, 27F, am in a bit of a dilemma and could really use some advice here. I've been living on my own for about 3 years now, and I've worked really hard to create a space that feels like mine. I've always been independent and value my privacy. I have a steady job, a small but comfortable apartment, and I love my routine. Everything was going fine until my brother, Adam, 24M, came into the picture. Adam and I have never been that close. We're siblings, sure, but we've always had different interests and personalities. I'm more of an introvert who likes peace and quiet, and Adam has always been more wild and spontaneous. Growing up, he often got into trouble, whether it was skipping school, hanging out with the wrong crowd, or breaking things in the house. I was the one who would study, keep to myself, and stay out of trouble, while Adam was the one my parents had to constantly bail out. Recently, Adam's life has hit a bit of a rough patch. He had been living with his girlfriend, Tanya, 22F, in a shared apartment. They were together for about 2 years, but apparently, things went south. Adam says they had a lot of arguments, mainly over his lack of ambition and his tendency to spend money on things he didn't need. Tanya kicked him out last week after a huge fight, and now Adam has nowhere to go. When Adam called me, I could hear the desperation in his voice. He was upset, frustrated, and honestly a little lost. He asked if he could stay at my place for a while until he figured things out. I knew it was probably a temporary thing, but I was hesitant. Adam doesn't have a great track record when it comes to living with people. He's not the cleanest, he tends to be loud, and he often borrows things without asking, which always irritates me. I asked him how long he expected to stay, and he said maybe a couple of weeks, maybe a month. I'll get things sorted, and then I'll be out. I told him I need to think about it and get back to him. I explained that I wasn't sure if I'd be able to handle living with him for an extended period of time, and that my place is small, so it would be a tight fit. He promised he would be on his best behavior, that he just needed a place to crash until he figured things out. Now, here's where things get complicated. I have a very specific routine. I work from home a lot, and I really need quiet to concentrate. I also like to have my space to myself to unwind and recharge. I'm not the kind of person who can just go with the flow all the time. I like things organized, and I don't like disruptions. That's not to say I don't care about Adam, but I know living together would be hard for me. I talked to my boyfriend, Jake, 30M, about it, and he was pretty supportive. He said it's a good thing to help family in times of need, but he also made it clear that we need to set boundaries. He's had a similar experience with his own brother, and he said it can be difficult to set limits if the person doesn't respect your space. He didn't want Adam to overstay his welcome and turn into an uninvited permanent guest. I agreed with Jake that boundaries were crucial, but I still wasn't sure if I was ready to open up my home to someone who had a tendency to push limits. I ended up calling Adam back and told him I was willing to let him stay for a week, but only if he followed a few ground rules. I told him he needed to help with the rent, keep the noise down, and respect my space. I also told him he couldn't have friends over, and he needed to keep his stuff organized. I didn't want things to get out of hand, and I made it clear that if things didn't work out, he would have to leave. Adam agreed to everything, and he seemed really grateful. He promised me that he would be respectful and that he wouldn't cause any problems. I was still a little unsure, but I figured I'd give it a shot. The first few days went okay, but things started to unravel pretty quickly. Adam's idea of respectful turned out to be a lot different from mine. First off, he barely contributed to the rent. He gave me some money for food, but it was far less than we'd agreed on. He also made a habit of leaving his dirty clothes all over the apartment and using my things without asking. One morning, I found him in my bathroom, using my shampoo and conditioner without permission. I asked him not to do that, and he shrugged it off, saying it's no big deal. The noise was another issue. Adam likes to play loud music at odd hours, and while I get that he has the right to listen to music, I don't think it should be at full blast while I'm trying to work. He would also stay up late, watching TV or playing video games at a volume that made it hard for me to concentrate. I tried talking to him about it, but he always seemed to have an excuse. I wasn't that loud, or I was just relaxing. It didn't stop there. A few days after he moved in, he brought over some of his friends without telling me beforehand. They showed up late at night and stayed for hours, making noise, drinking, and generally being inconsiderate. I told him he couldn't have people over without giving me a heads up first, and he acted like I was overreacting. It's just a couple of friends, he said. They're not that bad. It felt like everything I asked for was just brushed off. Adam's stay wasn't turning out to be the temporary arrangement I had hoped for. It was starting to feel like he was taking advantage of me. The last straw came when I found out he had taken my credit card information from a shared app we both use for groceries and used it without asking me. He bought a bunch of things I didn't approve of, including stuff he didn't even need. I confronted him about it, and he acted like it was no big deal. I just wanted some snacks, he said. At that point, I couldn't take it anymore. I told him that he needed to leave. I explained that I had tried to be accommodating, but he had crossed too many boundaries. I said I was done with this situation and couldn't have him living with me any longer. He got really upset, accusing me of not being there for him when he needed help. He said I was abandoning him like everyone else had. I felt terrible, but I knew I had to stick to my boundaries. Now, my family is mad at me. They think I'm being too hard on Adam and that I should have helped him more. My mom called me crying, saying that I should have been more patient, especially because Adam is going through a tough time. I understand that he's in a bad place, but I feel like I did what I could, and I can't keep enabling his behavior. So, AITA for asking my brother to leave my apartment after he didn't respect my space or follow the rules. AITA for refusing to lend my friend money for her medical bills after she said I owe her for my success. I, 32F, have been friends with Jessica, 30F, for about 8 years now. We met in college and hit it off immediately. Throughout the years, we've been through a lot together, good and bad. But recently, things have started to shift, and I'm starting to question if I've been too accommodating to Jessica's behavior, especially when it comes to money. I work in tech, and while I'm not rolling in cash, I've done well enough for myself. I live comfortably and am in a position where I can cover most of my expenses without too much stress. Jessica, on the other hand, has always had a bit of a different financial situation. She's always struggled with debt, and she's made some questionable financial decisions over the years. I've never really minded helping her out in small ways, paying for dinner sometimes, or helping with rent when she was in a tight spot. I've always considered her a close friend, and I know she doesn't have the same financial stability that I do. However, over the past year, things have escalated. Jessica's financial troubles have deepened, and she has started asking me for larger and larger sums of money. It started with small loans, maybe $200 or $300, and I didn't mind too much, figuring she'd pay me back when she could. But now, she's asking for thousands. She's in the process of dealing with some significant medical issues, and while I sympathize with her, I've started to feel uncomfortable with how often she's asking for help. A few weeks ago, Jessica reached out to me and asked if I could lend her $5,000 to cover some medical bills. I was taken aback. I knew she had been struggling with her health, but I didn't know the situation was this dire. I told her I needed some time to think about it, because lending her that much money was a big ask. It wasn't that I didn't want to help her. Of course I care about her and want her to be well, but I wasn't sure if I could afford to just give her that amount without it putting a strain on my own finances. When I finally responded, I told her that while I understood the gravity of her situation, I couldn't lend her that much money at this time. I explained that it wasn't that I didn't want to help, but I didn't have that kind of money to spare, especially since I'm saving for my own future and unexpected expenses. I also told her that I'd helped her in the past, and I needed to be more mindful of my own financial limits moving forward. Her response was not what I expected. She became really upset and said, I've always been there for you. I've supported you when you needed it. You owe me this. At first, I was taken aback. I've helped Jessica when she's needed it in the past, but I've never once thought of it as an exchange where she could then demand something from me. I've always helped out of the kindness of my heart, not because I expected anything in return. Jessica went on to say, I'm not asking for this because I want to. I'm asking because you're in a better position than I am. You have a good job. You live in a nice apartment. You have money to spare. It's the least you could do to help me out when I'm in this much trouble. I try to explain to her that I worked hard for what I have, and it wasn't a given that I could just throw money at every friend who was in a bind. I told her that I wasn't trying to be selfish, but I had to be responsible with my own finances and couldn't just hand out large sums of money. I also reminded her that I've helped her in the past, and I had done so willingly, but that didn't mean I was obligated to give her everything she asked for. Her response was even more heated. She said, So now you're too good for me? You're just going to ignore everything I've done for you over the years? I've always been there for you when you needed help, and now that I'm struggling, you just want to turn your back on me. I felt like I was being attacked for setting a boundary, and it hurt. I've always tried to be a good friend to Jessica, but at the same time, I can't sacrifice my own well-being for the sake of someone else's financial troubles. I tried to stay calm and said, I'm not turning my back on you. I've always supported you in other ways, but right now, I can't do what you're asking. I hope you can understand that. She didn't take it well. She called me selfish, said I was being cold-hearted, and that I was no longer the friend she thought I was. She said I didn't understand what it was like to struggle the way she had, and that my success had somehow made me out of touch with the reality of how hard life could be. To be honest, her words stung, and I started questioning if I was being too harsh. Since then, Jessica has been distant with me. She hasn't responded to any of my texts, and when I reached out to her to try to talk things through, she ignored me. I feel like I'm losing a friend over something that I thought was reasonable. I've done a lot for her over the years, and now that I've set a boundary, I feel like I'm being punished for it. I understand that she's going through a hard time, but I also feel like she's not respecting my boundaries or my right to make decisions about my own money. I've talked to a few friends about this, and some say I did the right thing by setting boundaries and not giving in to her demands. They think I'm not obligated to help her if it puts me in a difficult financial position. Others, however, have said that I should have just helped her out since she's clearly in need, and I've been fortunate enough to not be in the same situation. Some say I should have found a middle ground, like offering to help her with part of the bills or finding other ways to support her. I just feel stuck. I don't want to lose Jessica as a friend, but I also don't want to be taken advantage of. I've been trying to balance my empathy for her situation with my need to protect my own financial future. I feel like I'm being judged for doing what I thought was the right thing, and I'm not sure if I'm being unreasonable. AITA for refusing to lend my friend money for her medical bills after she said I owe her for my success. Hey friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. AITA for not letting my mom bring her new boyfriend to my house for Christmas. I, 28F, have always had a close relationship with my mom, but over the past few years, things have started to get complicated. My mom, 55, recently started dating someone new, and while I initially didn't think much of it, I've started to feel increasingly uncomfortable with the way things are going, especially when it comes to family events. We've always had a tradition in my family of spending Christmas together, just my mom, my dad, and me. Even though I'm an adult now and I have my own life and commitments, I always made time to be with my family for the holidays. Christmas was always a time when we could all reconnect and enjoy each other's company, and it meant a lot to me. This year, though, my mom told me that she was planning on bringing her new boyfriend, Dave, 58, to Christmas dinner. I was surprised, as it's been less than 6 months since they started dating, and I've only met Dave once in passing. My mom mentioned that she was really serious about him and that they were already talking about future plans. She told me that he would be joining the family for Christmas, and I needed to be open-minded about it. I didn't want to sound unsupportive, but I wasn't thrilled about the idea. My mom and dad have been married for over 30 years, and my dad passed away about 3 years ago. I understand that my mom is entitled to move on, and I've tried to be supportive of her dating life. But this felt different, too soon, too fast, and just a bit too much for me. I told her that I would prefer it if we kept the Christmas tradition just for our immediate family this year, especially since it would be the first Christmas without my dad. I explained that I needed time to adjust to her new relationship, and that introducing someone I didn't know well into a family event like Christmas felt overwhelming. My mom didn't take this well at all. She told me that I was being unfair, that I was holding on to the past, and that I should be happy for her and her new relationship. She said that Dave was a great guy and that she really wanted me to get to know him, but I just wasn't ready for that in such a personal, family-centered setting. She accused me of being selfish and stuck in the past, and said that if I didn't allow her to bring Dave to Christmas, it would be the first time in years she would spend the holiday without me. She made me feel incredibly guilty, saying that I was ruining Christmas for her, and that I was being too harsh on her new relationship. I tried to explain that it wasn't about her dating or her happiness, but that I needed to have some boundaries and space to adjust to this new phase in her life. In the end, I held firm on my decision and told her that I wasn't comfortable with her bringing Dave to Christmas dinner. I said she could come to my place for the day, but it would be just the two of us. I offered to meet Dave separately at a later time, but she could tell I was still not ready to fully embrace this new part of her life. Since then, things have been tense between us. My mom has been distant and has made several passive-aggressive comments about how I'm so quick to shut her out and that she can't believe I'm being so cold-hearted. I've even gotten some guilt-trippy texts saying things like, I guess I'll just spend Christmas alone, as usual, even though I invited her to spend the holiday with me. My friends and some family members are divided on the situation. Some think I'm being overly rigid and that I should give her the space to move on and be happy, while others believe I have every right to feel the way I do, especially with how quickly things are moving. I want to be supportive of my mom, but I feel like she's pushing me to accept something before I'm ready. I've always been her only child, and I think this whole situation is triggering a lot of my own unresolved feelings about my dad's death. I don't want to keep holding on to the past, but this sudden change feels like it's being forced on me, and it's not something I'm prepared to deal with yet. I'm now wondering if I made the right decision. I don't want to hurt my mom, but I also don't want to feel pressured into accepting a new relationship before I'm emotionally ready. AITA for refusing to let my mom bring her new boyfriend to Christmas dinner. AITA for not wanting to babysit my nephew after my sister-in-law called me selfish. I, 30F, have always been very close with my family, But recently things have gotten a little complicated with my sister-in-law, Ella, 32F, and my nephew, Ben, 5M. To give you some context, I've always been the fun aunt in the family. I love hanging out with my nieces and nephews, taking them on little adventures, and being there for them when they need me. I don't mind babysitting once in a while, and I always enjoy spending time with them. But recently, things have gotten a little out of hand, and I'm starting to feel like my generosity is being taken advantage of. Here's the situation. Ella has been going through a rough patch in her marriage with my brother, Mark, 34M. It's not anything new. There have always been ups and downs in their relationship, and I've tried to stay out of it. However, lately, things seem to have reached a boiling point. Mark and Ella have been arguing a lot, and she's been leaning on me more and more for support. I understand that she's going through a difficult time, and I've been there for her emotionally. But her expectations of me have shifted in a way that I'm struggling to keep up with. A few weeks ago, Ella asked if I could watch Ben for the weekend. She said she and Mark needed some time apart to figure things out and that she wanted to go away with some friends to de-stress. I was a little surprised by the request, but I agreed, thinking it would only be for a couple of days and that Ben and I would have fun together. I babysat for Ella before, and while I'm not a parent, I can usually manage just fine. However, the weekend quickly turned into more than I bargained for. Ella dropped Ben off on Friday evening and didn't return to pick him up until Sunday night. So far, so good. But then on Monday, she called and asked if I could watch him again because she and Mark were still fighting and needed space. I agreed, though I wasn't thrilled. I had a busy week ahead, and I was already feeling a bit overwhelmed with work and my own personal life. I tried to brush it off, but it quickly became clear that Ella wasn't planning on picking him up anytime soon. The week turned into 2, then 3, and by the end of the month, I'd spent more time babysitting Ben than I had ever intended. I love my nephew, but I'm not a full-time caregiver. I have my own responsibilities and my own life to take care of. Every time I tried to set boundaries with Ella, she would make excuses about how she needed to work on herself or that she couldn't handle everything alone. She kept saying, "I'll pay you back for all of this, don't worry," but I wasn't asking for money. I just wanted my time back. Finally, last week, I reached my breaking point. Ella called me again and asked if I could watch Ben for yet another weekend, saying she and Mark were going on a couple's retreat to try to save their marriage. This time, I was honest with her and told her that I couldn't keep doing this. I told her that I had a lot on my plate, that I needed a break, and that I felt like I had been constantly taking care of Ben without any real help or appreciation in return. I also pointed out that it had been weeks and I hadn't gotten any time to myself. Ella didn't take it well. She immediately started accusing me of being selfish, saying that I was abandoning her when she needed me most. She said that I didn't understand how hard it was to deal with her marriage problems and that Ben was her only source of comfort right now. She kept saying, "You're his aunt, you're supposed to be there for him," and that if I didn't help, she would have to find another way to manage. She even mentioned how much she was sacrificing for her marriage, and that the least I could do was help her out. I felt really bad, but at the same time, I was also incredibly frustrated. I had been there for her in countless ways, and I had given up my personal time to help with Ben, but it was starting to feel like she was taking advantage of me. I've never been one to expect anything in return for helping family, but the way Ella was acting, like it was my responsibility to take care of her son indefinitely, just didn't sit right with me. The situation has caused some tension in the family. Mark reached out to me and asked if I could be a little more understanding. He said that Ella really needed my help and that I shouldn't make her feel like she's asking for too much. He didn't outright tell me I was wrong, but it was clear that he expected me to keep helping. Meanwhile, Ella is still upset with me and keeps texting me about how I'm not being supportive enough. She says I don't understand what it's like to be in her shoes and that I'm being cold and heartless. Now, I'm really torn. On one hand, I get that Ella is going through a tough time, and I want to support her, but on the other hand, I feel like she's completely disregarded my needs and boundaries. I never signed up to be a full-time babysitter, and I don't think it's fair for her to keep dumping Ben on me without any clear end in sight. I've tried to explain to her that I need to prioritize my own life, but she keeps making me feel guilty for not dropping everything to help her. I've been called selfish by some family members, and I feel like I'm being painted as the bad guy. I love my nephew, and I don't want to hurt anyone, but I also feel like I need to stand up for myself. So, AITA for not wanting to babysit my nephew any longer after my sister-in-law kept asking me to watch him. AITA for asking my friend to stop bringing her boyfriend to every event. I, 28F, have a close-knit group of friends that I've known since college. We have a strong bond and try to get together as often as possible, whether it's for dinners, weekend getaways, or just casual hangouts. For the most part, things have always been pretty smooth, but recently, there's been some tension brewing because of my friend, Jessica, 29F, and her boyfriend, Alex, 30M. Jessica and Alex have been dating for about a year now, and while I genuinely like Alex, there's one problem that has been bothering me for a while. Jessica brings him to absolutely every event we have. I'm not exaggerating when I say every single one. We've had game nights, birthday celebrations, brunches, and movie nights, and every time, Alex is there. At first, I didn't mind so much because it's nice to meet her boyfriend, and I assumed it was a phase, but as time went on, it started feeling a bit suffocating. The thing is, the rest of us are mostly single, and while we understand that Jessica is in a relationship, it's hard for some of us to bond when there's a third wheel every single time. Jessica and Alex don't exactly make an effort to interact with anyone else. They spend the whole time together, talking to each other and barely engaging with the group. I understand that when you're in a relationship, it's easy to get caught up in each other, but it feels like the rest of us are being excluded. It's almost as if the dynamic of the group is shifting to accommodate Jessica and Alex, and it's been affecting the way we enjoy our time together. It reached a boiling point last weekend when we had a big group dinner planned to celebrate my friend Rachel's 30th birthday. It was supposed to be a fun night out, just the usual group of friends. I made sure to remind everyone about the reservation in advance, and everything was set. The night before, Jessica texted me asking if she could bring Alex, to which I replied, "Sure, no problem." But then, the day of the dinner, I noticed that the group chat was abuzz with comments from others who were also concerned about Alex attending. One friend, Molly, 27F, mentioned that she felt uncomfortable because every time Jessica brings Alex, it becomes less of a group event and more of a couple's outing. Another friend, Sam, 28M, agreed, saying that he missed having the group dynamic without someone always pairing off. I decided to reach out to Jessica privately, explaining how some of us had been feeling and asking if it would be possible for just this one event to be a friends-only gathering. I told her that while I liked Alex, I thought it would be nice for us to spend some time together as a group without feeling like we're constantly catering to a couple. I wasn't trying to cause drama, but I felt like it had gotten to the point where the group dynamic was being impacted, and I wanted to be honest about how I was feeling. Jessica responded right away, and I honestly thought she'd be understanding. Instead, she got really defensive. She said she didn't understand why this was such a big deal, and that I was being overdramatic and too sensitive. She mentioned how Alex had become a part of her life, and that it was natural for him to be included in everything, especially since they were serious about each other. She also pointed out that I'd never said anything to her directly before about not wanting Alex around, so it was too late to bring it up now. She finished the conversation by saying that if I didn't want Alex there, then she'd just skip the dinner altogether, and that it wasn't worth it to her if I was going to make such a big issue out of it. I was honestly taken aback. I never meant for it to blow up into a fight, and I thought I was being reasonable in my request. I felt like I was just asking for a little space, a moment for the group to be a group without the couple dynamic taking over. After she made it clear she wouldn't come without him, I reluctantly agreed to let Alex join, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in our friendship. At the dinner, things went as expected. Jessica and Alex were glued to each other the entire time, barely interacting with anyone else. It was awkward for all of us, and it felt like the group was fractured. At one point, Rachel even pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay with Jessica, because she could tell something was off. I tried to brush it off, but it was clear that it wasn't just me who was feeling this way. After the dinner, the group started to talk more openly about how they felt. Molly, Sam, and a few others admitted they'd been holding back because they didn't want to hurt Jessica's feelings, but they all agreed it was starting to feel like Jessica was no longer part of the group as a whole. it was just Jessica and Alex. Some people even said they didn't feel like hanging out with Jessica anymore because it was always a package deal. I was in a difficult spot because I didn't want to cause further tension, but it felt like the group dynamic was changing and not in a way that I was comfortable with. Over the next few days, I received a few texts from Jessica asking if I was upset with her. I told her that I was, and explained that the whole situation was making me feel a little alienated. I told her that I loved her and valued our friendship, but I was worried that she was drifting away from the group. She responded with more defensiveness, telling me that I was making things harder than they needed to be, and that if I didn't understand her need to spend time with her boyfriend, then maybe I wasn't being a supportive friend. This is where I'm really struggling. I want to be a good friend to Jessica, but I also want to preserve the friendships I have with the rest of the group. I feel like I'm being asked to choose between the two, and I'm not sure if I'm in the wrong for asking for a little balance. I understand that she's in a relationship, but I also feel like the group shouldn't have to revolve around that relationship all the time. I don't want to cause drama, but I also don't want to feel left out of my own friend group. So, AITA for asking Jessica to stop bringing Alex to every event. AITA for telling my best friend I don't want to be friends anymore after she constantly puts down my partner. I, 29F, have been best friends with Melissa, 30F, for over 10 years. We met in high school and have always been super close. We've been through a lot together, supporting each other through breakups, family issues, and career changes. So, I never expected things to get this complicated between us, especially when it comes to my relationship. I've been with my boyfriend, Jack, 31M, for almost 2 years now. We met through mutual friends and hit it off almost immediately. He's kind, caring, and treats me like I'm the most important person in the world. We have similar values, enjoy spending time together, and overall, he makes me happy. It's been a healthy, positive relationship, and I'm genuinely excited about where it's headed. However, Melissa has never seemed to like Jack. It started small at first. She'd make little comments about how she didn't think he was my type, or how she thought he seemed a little too serious for me. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe she just didn't know him well enough. But over time, her comments became more frequent and more pointed. She'd joke about how boring he was or how he never laughs when they'd all hang out together. She would even roll her eyes when I'd talk about something we did, like a trip we took or a funny story from a date. I tried to brush it off at first, thinking maybe Melissa was just being protective, but things got worse when she started to openly criticize Jack in front of me. She would question how I could be with someone who didn't challenge me enough or who wasn't ambitious enough, even though I've always been very clear about how happy I am with Jack and his own career. One time, we were having dinner at her place, and she actually said, "I just don't get how you're with someone who doesn't have his life together. You could do so much better than him." I was really hurt by that, but I didn't want to escalate things, so I just told her to drop it. But it didn't stop there. She would make little digs at Jack whenever we hung out, making him feel uncomfortable in his own skin. And when I tried to defend him, she'd brush it off as if I was being too sensitive. It felt like she was constantly undermining my relationship, and I started to feel like I couldn't talk about my boyfriend without her making me feel bad for it. It started affecting how I felt when I was around her. I feel like I had to constantly defend Jack, and every time I bring him up, she'd somehow twist it into something negative. Finally, the breaking point came a couple of weeks ago. Melissa and I were having a girls' night, just the two of us, and we were talking about future plans. I mentioned that Jack and I were thinking about moving in together soon, and we're starting to look at places. Melissa immediately got this look on her face, like she couldn't believe it. She said, "Are you sure that's a good idea? You don't even know if you'll be happy with him in the long run. He's so, well, boring." It was like she didn't even consider how much I cared about Jack and how much I trusted him. She just kept going on about how I could do better, how I shouldn't settle for someone who doesn't excite me. She even said, "You're still young. You don't need to rush into things with him." That was the moment I snapped. I told her that I didn't appreciate her constantly putting down Jack and that I didn't need her approval of my relationship. I told her that I loved Jack and that he made me happy and that I wasn't going to let her make me feel guilty for it. Melissa was shocked. She didn't even apologize for any of the things she had said in the past. She just acted like I was overreacting. She said, "I'm just trying to look out for you, but fine, if you're so sensitive about it, I guess I won't say anything anymore. I walked away from that conversation feeling incredibly hurt. It wasn't just that she didn't understand my relationship, but it was how dismissive she was of my feelings. I realized that she wasn't being a supportive friend. She was trying to control my choices, and the fact that she didn't respect my boundaries when it came to Jack made me question the entire friendship. A couple of days later, I decided to send her a message. I told her that I had been thinking a lot about everything that had happened, and that I felt like our friendship wasn't healthy for me anymore. I told her that I didn't want to be in a friendship where my partner was constantly criticized, and I couldn't talk about my relationship without feeling like I was being judged. I explained that I understood if she didn't like Jack, but I wasn't going to tolerate her disrespecting him, especially when he had done nothing to her. I told her that maybe it was best if we took a break from each other. Melissa didn't take it well. She immediately texted me back, saying I was being dramatic and that I was choosing Jack over our friendship. She said that she was just protecting me and that I was too blind to see that I could do better than him. She then went on to say that if I was really happy with him, I wouldn't let her comments get to me, and that I was ruining the best friendship I've ever had. She accused me of being too defensive and said I was acting like I had to pick sides. I haven't responded to her message yet. Part of me feels like I'm doing the right thing, like I'm finally setting a boundary that I've needed to set for a long time. But another part of me feels guilty. We've been friends for so long, and I don't want to lose that history. I also feel like I'm walking away from someone who's supposed to be one of my closest friends. But at the end of the day, I can't continue a friendship where I feel like I'm constantly being torn down for being in a healthy, happy relationship. So, AITA for telling my best friend I don't want to be friends anymore after she constantly puts down my partner. AITA for calling out my friend's husband for constantly showing up uninvited. I-29F have a close friend, Rachel, 30F, who I've known since college. We've always been close, and we've supported each other through the ups and downs of life. Over the years, we've built a pretty strong friendship, and I thought we had a good understanding of each other's boundaries. However, recently, there's been an ongoing issue involving Rachel's husband, Josh, 32M, that's starting to drive a wedge between us. Rachel and Josh have been married for about 2 years now, and while I don't have any major issues with him personally, there's one thing that has become increasingly frustrating. Josh shows up uninvited to events that are meant to be for friends only. It started small. He dropped by once in a while when we had a group hangout or dinner, but over time, it has become more frequent and intrusive. Now, it feels like Rachel can't attend any event without Josh tagging along, and it started to feel like he's taking over every social gathering. I get that Rachel and Josh are a married couple, and I understand that she wants to spend time with him. But the thing is, when we plan a girls' night out or a casual dinner with the group, it's meant to be a space for us to catch up, vent, and just have fun without feeling like we need to be on our best behavior or constantly accommodate a third wheel. For the past few months, Josh has shown up at pretty much every single event, and it's been disrupting the group dynamic. At first, I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to cause any tension or make Rachel feel uncomfortable. But it started to feel like every time we planned something, I had to wonder if Josh was going to show up. It wasn't just that he was there, it was the way he interacted with the group. He would hang around, dominate conversations, and often make comments that were awkward or out of place. We're a pretty laid-back group, but Josh's presence started to make things feel less relaxed. One night, we were all having dinner at a local restaurant, and Josh showed up uninvited once again. This time, he didn't even text Rachel to ask if he could join. He just walked in like he was expected. At this point, I had had enough. The group had already been talking about how we felt about Josh constantly inserting himself into our plans, and we'd all agreed that we needed to address it, but no one had the guts to say anything to Rachel directly. During that dinner, after Josh had made a few loud, inappropriate comments about things that had happened in our lives, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to Rachel and said, "Hey, can we talk about something? I've noticed that Josh keeps showing up uninvited, and it started to make things uncomfortable for everyone. It would be really nice if just once we could have a gathering without him there." Rachel looked shocked, and Josh immediately jumped in, saying, "What's the big deal? I just want to hang out with my wife's friends." "Is that so bad?" I calmly responded, It's not that we don't like you, Josh. It's just that sometimes we want to have some time without the partners around. It's nothing personal. We all value our girl time, and we just need a break from the couple dynamic every now and then. Rachel looked at me, clearly upset, and said, I didn't realize you guys felt that way. But I don't think it's fair for you to call him out in front of everyone like that. He's just trying to be included. The room went silent, and I felt a mix of frustration and guilt. I knew I had spoken the truth, but I also didn't want to make Rachel feel like I was attacking her or her relationship. It was just that, at that point, it felt like Josh's presence was an unspoken rule, and no one was really allowed to challenge it without feeling guilty. After that conversation, things got awkward. Rachel and I didn't talk for a few days, and when we did, she was distant. She said I had embarrassed her in front of Josh and that I should have brought up my concerns privately. I explained that I hadn't wanted to bring it up at all, but it had become so frequent that it was impossible to ignore anymore. I also said that I hadn't meant to hurt her feelings, but I felt like it was time to be honest. Over the next week, Rachel started texting me less. She said she needed some space to process everything, which I understood, but it still hurt. I wanted to respect her boundaries, but at the same time, I felt like my boundaries were being violated by Josh's constant presence. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't just about this one incident. It was about a pattern of behavior that had been building up for months. I felt like I had been patient and accommodating for far too long, and I had reached my limit. Eventually, I decided to send Rachel a text, saying that I hoped we could talk again soon and that I missed our friendship. I also reiterated that I didn't want to create a rift between us, but that I needed to be honest about my feelings. She responded a few hours later, saying that she appreciated my honesty, but that I shouldn't have attacked Josh the way I did. She said she had talked to him about it, and he felt hurt too. At this point, I started feeling guilty. I hadn't meant for Josh to feel hurt, but I had been frustrated for so long, and I wasn't sure how else to handle the situation. Rachel told me that she understood where I was coming from, but that I should have waited for a better time to talk to her about it. She also said that Josh wasn't going to stop showing up uninvited because he felt like he had the right to be included in everything, which left me feeling like there was no real solution. Now, I'm stuck in a place where I feel like I've done the right thing by setting a boundary, but I also don't want to lose my friendship with Rachel. I don't want to make things awkward or force her into a position where she feels like she has to choose between me and her husband. But I also don't want to keep going to events where Josh is constantly there, making things uncomfortable. So, AITA for calling out my friend's husband for constantly showing up uninvited? Was I wrong for saying something, or should I have just kept quiet and dealt with it? AITA for refusing to babysit my niece because my sister is always late? I, 32F, have a 4-year-old niece, Emma, and I love her to bits. She's adorable, sweet, and a lot of fun to be around. However, over the last year or so, my sister, Sarah, 34F, has asked me to babysit her more frequently, which I've always been happy to do, at least at first. The problem started when Sarah's work schedule became more unpredictable. She works in retail, and with the holidays coming up, she would sometimes need me to watch Emma for hours at a time, sometimes with very little notice. Initially, I didn't mind. I understand that her job can be demanding, and I like spending time with my niece. But over the past few months, things have gotten progressively worse. First off, my sister is always late picking Emma up. It's not a one-time thing or an occasional delay. This has become a regular occurrence. I have to keep changing my plans because she can't seem to arrive on time. She often tells me she'll be at my place by 6 p.m. to pick Emma up, but then it's 7 p.m. or sometimes even 8 p.m. when she finally shows up. I get that sometimes things happen, traffic, work emergencies, etc., but this happens every time, and I'm getting really frustrated. I've tried to be understanding at first, and I didn't want to make her feel guilty, so I just went along with it. I told myself it was temporary, and I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But then it started happening every time she asked me to babysit. It's become a pattern, and at this point, it's starting to feel like I'm being taken advantage of. My time isn't being respected. The last straw for me came last week. Sarah had asked me to watch Emma for the evening because she had a work event she couldn't miss. She said she'd be back by 7:30 p.m. I agreed, despite already having plans for the evening, figuring I could be flexible as I'd done before. By 8:15, she still hadn't shown up. I'd called and texted her multiple times, but there was no answer. Finally, around 8:30, she called me back, sounding flustered, and said she was still stuck at the event and would be home soon. I told her that I had plans and I needed her to pick him up by 9 p.m. at the latest. She arrived at 9:15 p.m., and by that point, I was feeling completely drained and annoyed. Emma was already starting to get cranky, and I was exhausted from trying to entertain her for so long. I tried to remain calm, but when Sarah showed up, I couldn't help myself. I told her that this had become an issue, and I needed her to stop being late all the time. I explained that it was starting to affect my schedule, and I felt like I couldn't rely on her to be punctual anymore. I said it wasn't just once in a while, it was becoming a regular occurrence, and I wasn't comfortable with it. Sarah's response was not what I expected. She immediately became defensive and said, "I'm doing the best I can. You know how unpredictable my work is. I can't help it if things run late." She went on to say that I should cut her some slack and that I was being overly dramatic. She accused me of not being understanding of her situation, even though I'd been helping her out for months without complaint. She said I was acting like I was doing her a favor and that I was making a big deal out of nothing. I tried to explain to her that I wasn't asking for perfection, but that I needed her to respect my time. I told her that I've been more than willing to help her out, but I didn't think it was fair that I had to constantly rearrange my plans and wait for her to show up late. She brushed it off and said, "You're not my only option. I can always find someone else to babysit, and I don't think you should be acting like this." That comment stung. I felt like she was trying to guilt trip me into keeping quiet about the issue, and that she didn't appreciate the fact that I was always there for her. I didn't want to feel like I was her backup plan whenever she couldn't find someone else to help. I was upset, but I didn't want to escalate things further. So, I told her that I couldn't keep watching Emma for her if she didn't start respecting my time. I said I couldn't keep rearranging my schedule and staying up late for her to show up hours after she said she would. She seemed shocked and hurt by what I said, and she tried to apologize, but I stood firm. I told her that if she wanted me to help her, she needed to make more of an effort to be on time. She left, and we haven't spoken much since. I've been thinking about the whole situation a lot, and I'm starting to wonder if I handled it the right way. On one hand, I feel like I'm in the right. I shouldn't have to keep waiting around for her when I've already rearranged my schedule multiple times. On the other hand, I feel guilty because I know she's going through a tough time at work and might not have control over her schedule. But at the same time, I don't think that should mean I have to accept being taken for granted. I've also been thinking that maybe I've been too lenient for too long, and I should have spoken up sooner. But now, I feel like I might have crossed the line, and I don't want to damage my relationship with Sarah. At the same time, I'm not sure I'm willing to keep babysitting Emma if this issue keeps happening. So, AITA for refusing to babysit my niece because my sister is always late? AITA for refusing to lend my friend money after she keeps borrowing and not paying it back? I, 27F, have a friend, Jess, 28F, who has been in my life for about 8 years. We met in college, and we hit it off immediately. She's the kind of person who's always the life of the party, and everyone loves being around her. Over the years, our friendship has had its ups and downs, but we've always managed to work through things until recently. Over the past year, Jess has been going through some financial struggles. She works a decent job, but she's also been living paycheck to paycheck, mainly because of her lifestyle choices. Jess tends to live beyond her means, buying things she can't afford and then dealing with the consequences later. I've seen her go on expensive trips, buy designer bags, and make impulse purchases, all while telling me that she's broke or in a tight spot. At first, I was sympathetic. I've helped her out a couple of times, either by offering a place to crash when she was between apartments or lending her money when she was short on rent. I've never minded helping a friend in need, but what started as an occasional favor has turned into something much more complicated. Jess started borrowing money from me more regularly. The amount weren't huge at first, $1.50 here and there for things like gas or groceries. I didn't think much of it because, honestly, I felt like she'd pay me back soon. But then, it became a regular thing. She'd asked to borrow money multiple times a month for things like bills, food, or her cell phone payment, promising she'd pay me back as soon as she could. I'm a type of person who's very careful with my finances. I don't make a lot of money, but I try to manage my expenses wisely. The idea of lending money to a friend was never something I took lightly, but I kept telling myself that she would follow through and pay me back. But months went by, and Jess never actually paid me back. Instead, she would say things like, "I'll pay you soon, just having a bit of a tough time right now," or "I'll get you next payday." The excuses piled up, and I kept waiting for her to follow through. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I trusted her. But after a few months of being constantly asked for money and then never receiving repayment, I started to feel taken advantage of. The situation became even worse when I noticed that Jess would borrow money from me, but then turn around and post about her latest shopping spree or a trip she took with friends. It felt like she had no problem spending money on things she didn't need, yet couldn't seem to pay me back for the loans I'd given her. Eventually, I reached my breaking point. I had lent her close to $800 over the past 6 months, and every time I brought up repayment, the same excuses came up. She'd tell me things like, "I'll pay you next week, I swear," or "I'm waiting for a paycheck to clear." But it never happened. Last week, Jess asked me for another $150 to help cover a car payment. This time, I had to put my foot down. I told her that I couldn't lend her any more money until she paid me back what she already owed. I explained that I've been patient with her, but I was getting frustrated by her lack of follow-through and the fact that she was spending money on unnecessary things while still owing me money. I told her that I couldn't keep enabling this cycle. Jess was furious. She immediately texted me saying that I was being selfish and unsupportive. She accused me of being petty and not being a real friend because I wouldn't help her out when she needed it the most. She said that if I truly cared about her, I would understand her situation and help her without expecting repayment. She also made some comments about how I had plenty of money and could afford to help her, implying that I was being cheap and unwilling to support her in her time of need. Her response made me even more upset. I told her that I wasn't trying to be unsupportive, but that this was a pattern I couldn't ignore anymore. I told her I was happy to be there for her emotionally, but I couldn't keep giving her money when she hadn't shown any responsibility with the money she'd already borrowed. I also reminded her that true friendship should involve mutual respect, and it wasn't respectful to borrow money from someone and not follow through on repayment. Jess didn't take it well, and we ended up having a huge argument. She called me a terrible friend and told me that I was only looking out for myself. She said that she had always been there for me, but I was clearly too busy for her when it really mattered. She then said that if I didn't help her out, I wasn't someone she could rely on anymore, and that she would have to cut me out of her life. Since then, Jess hasn't spoken to me. She hasn't replied to any of my texts or calls. I've been thinking a lot about the situation, and I'm starting to question if I made the right choice. Part of me feels bad because I do care about Jess, and I hate to see her struggle. But another part of me feels like I'm not being unreasonable. She's an adult, and she needs to take responsibility for her actions. I can't continue to be taken advantage of, especially when it feels like she's not valuing my help. I've also started thinking that maybe I've been too lenient with her in the past, letting her borrow money without setting proper boundaries. But at the same time, I never imagined it would come to this, her not speaking to me over a loan that she's never repaid. I just wanted her to show some responsibility and respect for the friendship. So, AITA for refusing to lend my friend money after she keeps borrowing and not paying it back. AITA for telling my friend she's being hypocritical about my job. I, 27F, have a close friend, Sarah, 28F, who I've known since high school. We've always been there for each other through thick and thin, and our friendship has been one of the most important relationships in my life. However, recently, there's been an issue that's causing some tension between us, and I'm not sure if I'm in the wrong here. To give some context, I work as a freelance social media manager. My job involves helping small businesses, influencers, and brands grow their presence online. It's a pretty flexible job that I enjoy, and it allows me to work from home, set my own hours, and travel when I want. I've been doing it for a few years now, and while it's not always the most stable income, It's something I've built a successful career out of. I'm proud of the work I do, and it's fulfilling for me. Sarah, on the other hand, works a more traditional 9 to 5 job at a law firm. She's always been someone who values job security and a structured routine. She's always been the type of person who believes in the get a good job, stay in one place for years, climb the corporate ladder mentality. She has always looked down on the freelance lifestyle, thinking it's unstable and not real work. We've had discussions in the past about her opinions on freelancing, and I've always brushed them off, thinking she just didn't understand my career choice. Recently, things started getting awkward between us. It began when I posted a picture on Instagram of me working from a cafe while traveling for a client meeting. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, just a shot of my laptop and a coffee cup with a caption about how I loved the freedom of being a freelancer. I didn't think much of it, but Sarah texted me shortly after and said, "Are you really still doing that freelancing thing? Seems like you're just working from cafes and calling it a career." At first, I was a little surprised by her response. I thought maybe she was joking, but it quickly became clear she wasn't. She went on to tell me that she thought freelancing was just a phase and that it wasn't a sustainable way to make a living. She even implied that I wasn't taking my career seriously and that I was just having fun and playing around with my job. I tried to explain to her that freelancing was my chosen career path and that I had built something successful from it. But she kept brushing it off and saying things like, "You should really think about getting a real job," and "It's not too late to get a corporate job." I was hurt by her comments, especially because Sarah has always been someone I turn to for advice and support. I thought she understood me better than this. But then, things escalated when she invited me to a dinner party at her apartment with some of her friends and colleagues. When I arrived, I noticed that she had invited a few of her co-workers from the law firm, and the conversation quickly turned to work. I knew most of them, but there was one guy, Tom 33M, who I hadn't met before. He's an associate at the firm, and as soon as he heard about my freelance career, he started asking me all sorts of questions. At first, I thought it was just curious conversation, but as the night went on, I realized that he was more interested in judging my job than actually learning about it. Tom asked me, "So, how do you even find clients, and is it hard to get paid? And how do you make sure your work is actually worth something?" His tone was condescending, and I could tell he was just looking for a reason to belittle me. I tried to answer his questions calmly, explaining how I find clients, how I set my rates, and how freelancing has allowed me to work with a variety of clients and grow my skill set. But it was clear he wasn't listening. He just kept making sarcastic comments like, "Oh, so you basically just make social media posts for people. Sounds like a real job." At that point, I could feel my frustration bubbling up. I turned to Sarah and said, "Hey, I get that you and your friends have a different perspective, but can we drop the freelancing jokes? I work hard for my clients, and I'm proud of what I've built. Just because my career doesn't look like yours doesn't mean it's not valid." Sarah immediately snapped back. "Well, maybe if you worked harder, you'd have a real job like everyone else here. It's not that I'm against you, but freelancing just doesn't seem like it's sustainable long term. You don't have the same stability that we have, and that's something you need to think about." I was taken aback. Not only was she defending Tom's rude comments, but she was now implying that my entire career choice was inferior to hers. I felt like my friend had betrayed me. I wasn't asking her to agree with my career choice, but I was expecting basic respect, especially after all the support we've given each other over the years. I responded, "You've always had this attitude about freelancing, Sarah, but I never expected you to agree with everything I do. I didn't come here tonight to be judged for my career, especially by someone who doesn't even know what it's like." The room went quiet, and I could tell that I had caused an uncomfortable moment. Sarah looked upset and said, "I'm just trying to be realistic, and you should be too. Freelancing is fine for now, but what happens when you're older and want more stability?" That's when I snapped a little. I said, "I've been freelancing for years, Sarah. I made it work, and I'm doing just fine. You and Tom act like my job is a joke, but I don't go around questioning your career choices. Just because my path doesn't look like yours doesn't mean it's any less valid. Maybe you should think about being more supportive instead of just assuming that the way you did things is the only way." The rest of the evening was awkward. Sarah barely spoke to me, and I ended up leaving early. We've barely talked since then, and when we do, it's strained. I feel like I was justified in standing up for myself, but part of me is wondering if I was too harsh. I've always respected Sarah's career, even if it wasn't the path I chose, and I don't know if I crossed a line by calling her out. So, AITA for standing up for myself when my friend and her husband were being dismissive of my job. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.